Hello, this is Katie with Happy Hearted Watercolors, and today I'd like to show you some of the discrete skills you'll need to create this cattail scene. In the scene, you'll notice there are cattails, and we call them fuzzy cattails, and fancy leaves with different colors dropped in, and a way to lift some of the color out of the leaves to show veins. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need to do is find a piece of scratch paper. I like to use a spiral bound notebook that has a fairly thick paper that I can practice some of my watercolor skills on them. And to start out with, let's very lightly sketch a long oval for the cattail. I'll make another one with a little bit of a tilt to it at a different height, and another one at a different height yet. This one's maybe smaller. The first thing you need to do is wet down your cattails with clean water and let the water soak into the paper until the paper is just the color of satin. So I'll do a couple of these and keep my eye on the first one as I get the other two wet. I'm working left to right, being right-handed. That way I won't lay my hand over the top of the wet paint. And it looks like we're just about satin enough there. This is probably a 90-pound paper or 110-pound paper in a spiral notebook. And what I like to do is practice these skills so that when I get to my real thing, I've done it at least a couple times. So here we go, getting some fuzzy look on these cattails. The paint I'm using is just a very inexpensive Jack Richardson pan of paint. There's 12 colors in, and I always add in a warm blue at one end and a warm yellow at the other end, so that I've got my full component of warm and cool primaries. Okay, notice how I'm just kind of continuing to work this so that the colors are going out to the edges. And if they go too far, just kind of pick some of it up. Okay, this one is a little dry, so I'm adding a little more water. And if you use a good quality watercolor paper, you won't find this buckling on your paper when you do your real project, which I don't do any real projects on a cheap watercolor paper. If I'm going to invest some time on a project, even if I buy my sheet of watercolor paper for $15, I cut it into 6 pieces, and they're less than, if my math is right, they're less than $3 a sheet, which is less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So you can see how the paper or the paint is fuzzing out to the edges. And again, as I look at this next one, the last one, you'll notice that it needed a little more water, and I got water on my brush and it still had some of the brown on it. So I'm just going to leave it like it is, pull some of the water up because I want it to get to that satin stage. Going back over to this section. Letting the water do its work. Pulling the paint out to where it's still a little damp. I just rinsed my brush and wiped it a bit to smooth these edges out. I'm going to pretend like this little bloop there was a place where an insect got caught in the fuzziness of the cattails. If I work this too much on this really thin paper, I'll end up with a wad of damp paper. Okay, so practice those a couple times. You could go the next step and put in a cattail stem, and always at the top tell what you did so that you remember how you made that. Wet, in wet, so that was the first thing the one thing I want to write down, and then I just draw a medium loaded brush down the middle. And then the last thing you do, 1, 2, 3, the last thing you do is adjust before it dries. And this is still a little bit wet, and I can tell it's a little bit wet because when I touch it with the back of my hand, it feels cold. And I very lightly touch to see what I've got going there. I want to get a little more color into the middle here. Okay, there we go. That's my technique practice. Turning the next page, I call these fancy leaves. And to draw some fancy leaves, sorry about that, I'm just going to take and make some leaves in graceful forms at different heights. When you do your actual cattail, you might want to make them a little more thin so the balance is right. But don't worry about the practice sheet so much. When you do your real project, you'll want to get your design put on a piece of paper, then transfer that design onto your paper using graphite transfer paper. I like using real graphite transfer paper that you make yourself. You can find instructions online to do that, making your own transfer paper. You can use one sheet of paper many, many times. I'm going to get a warm green and have it be my darkest color. Oh, it doesn't look too dark there, does it? Add a little brown into that, and putting brown into green, a brighter green, really does nice things for making it look real. Rinsing the brush, pulling the color on down throughout to the bottom of the leaf. And then, so that I don't have a fox hole here, I want to try to make this green where the leaf went underneath to this other green where it goes underneath on the other side, the same color. As you notice, it's not. So using a little bit of paint, adjust. That was too green. So what I did is I wiped my brush on a towel, a rag, and come back through here. And I like to drop lots of color in so that there's a different color every inch at least. And right here at the bottom I put a purple. Purple and green will make a really neat darker green, or even look kind of purple, which I kind of like the looks of that. Then coming back through, you'll be able to lift the colors so that you get these streaks right here, like you see here. Now with this kind of paper, this really thin paper, I can't practice it. And this here also, you can see where there's a little bit of lifting of color there. The other thing you can do, which is kind of fun, is to take a chopstick or some sharp implement and scratch gently, especially if you're working with this thinner paper that's not really watercolor paper. So that you get some of the paint filling back into where the scratches were. You can see that. Now I'm not going to work here in this area yet because it's still pretty wet. I can tell by putting the back of my finger through there, it feels cold. So I'm going to work on this leaf right here, doing the same thing. I think this time I'll try getting it wet first. So wet and wet. And I don't want it to be too wet. So I'm just going to again pull some of the water out by putting the brush on a paper towel or an old rag. This one's going to be a little brighter, I think. So bringing the leaf all the way down, the color all the way down into the bottom of the leaf, and then maybe going again to get that purple that you find in the Jack Richardson Yarka paint set. And just for fun, let's pretend like the sun has kissed the top of this one. Now looking a little wet, I want to adjust that a bit. A little bright, it looks too bright, so I'm going to just adjust that with adding another color on top. I call these fancy leaves. Now the next thing that I want to do is take this and make it look like the leaf is turning over on itself. And I'm only going to go down this far because I have a wet leaf here. So I'm going to take and put a dark color here in the corner. Notice that looks almost black with the purple and the green. Works pretty well. And then I'm going to put a little bit of yellow here on the tip. And then also I want to put some yellow right here. Because we've got this sun kissing right here on the other leaf. Or I don't know what to call those things on the... And if I am really careful and leave a little band of white or dry, right there. I won't have my colors go mixing together too badly. Okay, and again, since I started doing the scratching method here, I'm going to do some scratching in a different place. You want to use your composition skills here so that you don't have the vines showing up in the same place on all the fronds. So here we have the fancy, what I call fancy leaves. Okay, so we have fuzzy, sorry about that, shadow, and you've got the fancy leaves. And so you'll see the start of this project here on great paper. I love this paper. I'm going to take a second here now to adjust the camera and the lights so we don't have shadows. I'm going to turn that off. Maybe that's bright enough for you. You see, I probably started here with a darker color and then added lighter or water. It's darker there in the corner, and then the end is tipped with sunlight. So let's try doing this leaf right here. The next thing you want to think about when you're doing this is think about which are your foreground stems and leaves, and which are the middle ground and which are the background. So as I look at this section right here, I think these are really far back in the back. So I want to make them darker. And to make them darker, I'm going to take that same brown with some blue, with some brown, some black and brown, excuse me, and just place a little thin strip. I'm going to try to cover up the pencil lines so they don't show in the final picture. And if you want, I love to make every inch different. So pull out paint in different sections so that there's a slight variation of color. When you look around at the world, there is no color that stays exactly the same anywhere. And as I go farther down, deeper into the shadows of the cattail swamp, it's going to get even darker. And you'll notice that I forgot to draw this. I'm going to make it up on the spot, this section right here. Each time I add another leaf or stem, I want to make sure that I'm not working right next to something that's still wet. Okay, so this is my only wet thing right now. So I think what I might like to do is take this leaf right here that's going to go over the top of everything. I'm going to further erase this section right here. I'm using really nice paper. I use Arches 140 pound cold press watercolor paper most of the time. If I don't use 140 pound, I use 300, and you don't have to stretch the 300 pound paper at all. This is not stretched because I'm not soaking the paper. So I can get away with not stretching the paper here. Now remember, we've got a little fold here, so I'm going to tuck a little bit of the brown in there and then adjust the color by rinsing my brush and pulling it down. And I'm just having fun here with these colors. I'm enjoying watching the paint and the water work together and seeing what I can get on the paper. Every time I do a project, it's going to be different. Every time I learn something, even people that have been watercoloring for a long time, they will learn new things, add new tools in their toolbox so that they can keep growing. That's one of the most fun things for me about watercolor, is that I can keep learning and keep growing. Now this section here is flipped over and is a little brighter. You'll notice because it's on the top. It's the closest to us. It's the forest of the foregroundest. And just for fun, I think I'll add a little bit of that warm yellow. I added cadmium yellow to the corner of my, or the bottom part of my watercolor palette. These colors work really well and will get you through your first watercolor paintings very easily, and you can decide at that point in time, when you are done with these, what you want to buy again. My favorite brands to use, besides this Yarka for beginning people, is a brand called Danielle Smith, and I love those, and I also dearly love the MJ. I'm losing that word in my head. That's called M. Graham, excuse me, M. Graham paints. Right now what I'm doing is I'm getting a clean chisel brush. I'm going to try to pull out some color from this leaf that I had just painted. It's tiny bit, tiny bit cool. And I'm putting a little bit of water on it and wiping it on the paper towel after I pull the color out. So you can see how it, just by lifting the color, you can get a little bit of a variation again on your painting. Let's try it here. I want you to see this is still a little bit satiny. So when I do this, it's going to have a little different effect. You see how this is, you're pulling it out, but it's still pretty wet, so it's sliding back in. Here, if I do it where it's dry, the paint doesn't fill back in. So depending on what you want, the look you want, you can have it just be a real light lift or a sharper lift. So enjoy this lesson called Get Fuzzy with fancy leaves and fuzzy cattails. Thanks for listening.